The power outage that caused travel chaos at Heathrow earlier this year was caused by a catastrophic failure of equipment at the electricity substation that supplies the airport. According to an official report into the incident, the Energy Secretary has described the findings of the report as deeply concerning. Let's take you back and look at when and how this all happened. It was the 21st of March. Heathrow, Europe's busiest airport, was closed for 16 hours. It was the fire at North Hyde substation that supplies electricity to Heathrow that caused the power outage. It's around 1.5 miles away. Well, let's look at what today's report says about how that fire happened. It says the report is by the National Energy System Operator. It says that the fire was most likely caused after moisture entered electrical equipment at the North Hyde substation, causing a short circuit, which led to oil being set alight. It said the issue had been known about for 7 years, saying that back in 2018, the national grid found higher than expected moisture levels, which were not addressed. The report also says the disaster could have been avoided if basic maintenance planned to take place in 2022 had not been delayed. The Energy Minister, Michael Shanks, has been talking about it in Parliament in the last hour.
Having reviewed the report, as I'm sure members will agree, I'm deeply concerned that known risks were not addressed by National Grid Electricity Transmission, a key operator of our electricity system. NGET's own guidance is clear. Based on the elevated moisture samples NGET themselves took in 2018, the asset should have remained out of service until mitigating actions were put in place, or the asset should have been carefully monitored until it could be replaced. NGET failed to take action appropriate to the severity of this risk at North Hyde. This was most likely the cause of the catastrophic fire on the 20th of March 2025. I spoke to NGET this morning and made clear that these findings are unacceptable and that action must be taken to ensure that maintenance work on critical assets is prioritised appropriately.
Well, joining me now is Simon Gallagher from UK Networks Services, which is an independent grid expert. Simon, really good to talk to you today to get your expertise. We spoke to you on the day that it happened, and you had lots of ideas about what may have caused it. What now, when you look at this report and see what they're saying, what do you think, first of all, about the fact that it was something that they'd said could potentially happen years earlier?
Yeah, I mean, there's no excuse in the fact that there's definitely a failure with the National Grid, the company that owns that substation. So back in 2018, they took a routine oil sample of a bit of kit attached to the transformer called a bushing, and that oil revealed that there was moisture in there, which has no place being inside a high voltage bushing. So National Grid's own guidance at the time, their own engineering policy, says that transformer should have had that bushing replaced, and actually it should have stayed out of service until that was done. Unfortunately, the transformer is re-energised, and there's been a litany of failures since where that bushing was never replaced, and ultimately, unfortunately, it led to the catastrophic failure we've seen, which was effectively a small explosion, which then damaged the rest of the transformer.
Why would something like this not be replaced? I mean, clearly there's a safety issue. There's also, the service that they're providing from this substation. I mean, is it a particularly expensive or difficult thing to do to replace the bushing?
Well, it's fairly routine. So that these transformers are designed that these bushings are a separate part. So you have to switch the transformer out, make it all safe, and replace it. So it's a few days' work, probably in the tens of thousands of pounds. So in the grand scheme of running a network, it's not expensive. So I think this is more probably an internal process failure within National Grid's asset management system rather than any kind of attempt to save money or any other sort of nefarious thing. This is probably just something that should not have been, but was overlooked for years on end. But I think we can draw a distinction between this should have been replaced. The transformer never should have went on fire. But there's also a wider question about should the critical national infrastructure at Heathrow Airport, should that have responded the way it does? So, and this report that was issued this morning draws a bit of a parallel between the two.
Yeah, I mean, what have we learned about the way that Heathrow depends upon these service stations and what kind of backup it has?
Well, it's like we talked about last time. So Heathrow has 3 completely independent grid supplies, and it was built that way back in the 1960s when it was last expanded in a material way. And it was built with these 3 independent supplies so that if something did happen to one of them, the other 2 could take over. In fact, the whole airport can be fed from just one of them. But whatever's happened since the 1960s until now, Heathrow's internal network, the way it is today, cannot take advantage of the fact that they have these 3 independent supplies. So unfortunately, whenever they lost one grid supply, and let's be clear, grid interruptions will always happen. In the report, Heathrow Airport actually stated that they thought it was an uninterruptible power supply, and there's no such thing as an uninterruptible power supply from the grid. But that network, the way it's run today, means that when they lost that one feed, they couldn't effectively use the other fully resilient feeds they had. So there is huge questions over why Heathrow allowed that to happen.
Do you think lessons have been learned, Simon? Do you think we can avoid this happening again, or does the same system, is it still in place?
The report that NESO, the National Electricity Energy System Operator, put out, that does have some good quality recommendations in there. So I think the power industry and already Ofgem have commenced what's called an enforcement investigation against National Grid. So I think the power industry, led by NESO, is learning lessons here. But if you look at the report, the internal report that Heathrow did, which was by one of their own directors, that report wasn't so critical and basically said that, yes, it was very bad. There's not a lot we could have done to prevent the outages we had, which most of the industry does not agree with. Most of the people who have run electricity networks will say, no, that network could have been configured to use its 2 redundant supplies. So there's definitely a difference of opinion on the lessons that Heathrow seem to have learned. But on the wider industry, the NESO report does seem to really get at the crux of lessons we need to learn as an industry. Chiefly, National Grid need to tighten up on their asset management procedures so that when something's identified, like it was back in 2018, it is actually actioned and it's repaired and not left to go wrong in the future, which is what's happened here.
Yeah, pretty expensive oversight. Simon, good to talk to you. Simon Gallagher there from UK Network Services. Thanks a lot.